Welcome everyone to one of the most controversial topics in nutrition. A topic which has started literal wars between groups. Some say you should only eat high carbs, some say you should have no carbs. But what's up with this whole ketogenic dieting thing? Today that's what we're going to discuss. So as a background on this, some nomadic cultures held out for extended periods on the agricultural surge. Okay, this included the Kiowa, the Maasai, and Lakota. They basically lived solely on eating buffalo. What's interesting is that these nomads were 6 to 12 inches taller, and they were known for their physical prowess than European settlers whose sustenance depended on wheat and corn. The greatest long-duration endurance athletes in the world are Alaskan dogs. And what we see is these dogs can run 1,000-mile races, and they perform far greater on high-fat, meat-based diets as compared to carbohydrate diets. The last 10 years of research have completely transformed the role of fat in health. What we found is that very low carbohydrate, high-fat diets are anti-inflammatory, producing less oxidative stress during exercise and more recovery between sessions. Low-carb ketogenic dieting essentially causes you to rely more on fat, both at rest and during exercise. It accelerates overall the use of saturated fats being broken down as fuel. This allows for a high total amount of fat intake without risk, and it may be beneficial for endurance athletes and strength/power sports, in which power to weight ratios are important. So, what is ketosis? Like, what exactly is ketosis? Well, it's a metabolic state in which the liver produces these small organic molecules called ketone bodies. And it produces them at sufficient levels so that you can run off them as your primary fuel. So ketone bodies refer to three specific molecules. That's acetone, acetoacetic acid, or acetoacetate, and beta-hydroxybutyric acid, or BHB. Now, not all ketone bodies are ketones. By the technical definition, a ketone is an organic molecule where you have a carbon atom, as you can see down to the left, that's sandwiched between two other carbon atoms and is double bonded to an oxygen. Okay, so what you see here is acetone is a ketone, acetoacetic acid is a ketone, but beta-hydroxybutyrate is not a ketone. But all of these are used as fuels. And so when they're high in the blood, we call it ketosis. Now, how do we tap into fat? How is fat metabolized? Well, as you recall, fatty acids get cleaved off of a glycerol backbone. That is the beginning of lipolysis. The rate-limiting enzyme for this is hormone-sensitive lipase. So fat breakdown is controlled principally by a hormone which regulates hormone-sensitive lipase. What is that hormone? Can you guess? Well, we're going to talk about that in a second here. But here is sort of a picture of what happens. You have triglycerides. Hormone-sensitive lipase hydrolyzes the triglycerides, so now you have three fatty acids in a glycerol. The glycerol can get used for energy, and the three fatty acids enter beta oxidation. And beta oxidation, essentially, you're cleaving off two fatty acids at a time and producing acetyl-CoA, which is the universal intermediate. Acetyl-CoA goes in a citric acid cycle, and then eventually the products from that go into the electron transport chain. Well, if you guessed insulin, you were right. Fat breakdown is principally controlled by insulin, and insulin inhibits hormone-sensitive lipase. This we can claim that insulin is the gatekeeper. Now, insulin is quite possibly the most important physiological inhibitor of lipolysis. Here we're looking at fatty acid flux on the vertical axis, and on the horizontal axis insulin. Notice that just a little bit of insulin completely inhibits fatty acid flux. And this is a really good graph. We see that if you were to have a sugar spike, it causes the body to release a large amount of insulin, plus you're going to have a crash. That's going to block fat breakdown and fat oxidation. Now, how much can carbs inhibit fat metabolism? This is a really good study, I think. You're looking at glycerol and fatty acids. And glycerol and fatty acids, the higher these are, the greater fat or lipolysis is occurring. So we see here, they essentially have them run, for 95 minutes at 55-75% of their VO2 max. And what you can see here is the fatty acid levels with the placebo. Okay. And the 45 grams of carbs, 156 grams of carbs, and 312 grams of carbs. This is every carb condition. Notice that fatty acids are notably lower in all carb conditions, particularly the 312 gram condition, than that line that's above, which is no carbs. Same thing happens here. Glycerol levels are much lower in the carbohydrate groups compared to the placebo. So this suggests that lipolysis is much higher in the presence of low carbs. So this is kind of how it works. If you have a healthy amount of insulin in your blood, hormone-sensitive lipase is turned on, and we can catabolize fat. However, if a high amount of insulin is in the blood, we inhibit the door, or the gate, which is hormone-sensitive lipase, and we accumulate fat. Well, a lot of bodybuilders will say, or if you're trying to gain mass, if I have a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet, I lose muscle like crazy. My muscles shrink immediately. Well, that's contrary to what that popular belief is. Low carb ketogenic diets can actually spare the body's protein from being oxidized. So if a typical high carb adapted athlete runs out of fuel and their brain needs a function, it will get carbs from wherever it can get it from, including gluconeogenesis, or production of glucose from your muscle amino acids. Great study by Steve Finney basically found that keto-adapted athletes had higher circulating branched-chain amino acids than the high carbohydrate group, and this is because instead of having to break down amino acids for fuel, the body was able to burn ketones in their place. In another study, they actually found that BHB inhibited oxidation of leucine. So ketosis can actually be anabolic. One of the biggest questions that we get is, well, what's the difference between low carb dieting and ketogenic dieting? Well, we see this here. You're looking at weight loss, percent weight loss is fat. You had 3 isocaloric diets, 1,800 calories apiece. One group had 100 grams of carbs. That's the blue group on the graph. One had 60 grams of carbs, that's the green group, and one had 30 grams of carbs. The 30 grams were keto adapted. The other groups were not. Notice that the percentage of fat loss was greatest in the 30-gram ketogenic group. So actually getting into ketosis may be key. Now, one of the things that you'll see like at doctor's offices, if someone says, I want to try a ketogenic diet, you'll oftentimes see that the doctors will flip out. Wait a second. you can't do a ketogenic diet, because if you do a ketogenic diet, you're going to have ketoacidosis. But there's a difference between nutritional ketosis and ketoacidosis. Nutritional ketosis, in which you have 30 grams of carbs a day, or 5 to 10% of your carbs provided, or 5 to 10% of your diets from carbs. Basically, you have plasma ketones from 0.3 to 3 millimolars. Ketoacidosis, you have blood ketones of greater than 20 millimolars. In nutritional ketosis, your blood pH stays normal. In ketoacidosis, pH is driven abnormally low by a 10-fold greater buildup of ketones. And this happens when you're diabetic. Okay? 100% different, not to be confused with nutritional ketosis. This is actually Ryan and I when we tried ketogenic dieting in the fall. Seemed to help actually get us cut really quick. And that's the end of the lecture, guys.